Check. Good morning, and welcome to the Swedish Society of Medicine. And thank you all for coming. Almost 100 people on a Friday morning, that's quite impressive. The Society of Medicine has a long and strong commitment to global health and sustainable development. And from this fall, we will also have a subcommittee working on a climate policy. And through the Committee of Global Health, which I'm the chair of, my name is Helena Frilingsdorf, by the way. We try to organize seminars, conferences, and we use different platforms, podcasts, you name it, usually with a big student involvement in order to increase awareness, interest, and hopefully also stimulate evidence-driven policy towards global health. And we also really cherish our collaborations. And today I'm particularly proud and excited to introduce you to one successful collaboration with CITE. Yeah, and this one was co-led by both CITE and the Society of Medicine, particularly from our side, driven by Tobias Alvén, who is my predecessor as chair for the Committee for Global Health. And we all know that the road to good health and well-being starts before birth and continues throughout life, with childhood and adolescence being particularly important for future health outcomes. Every child deserves to survive and to not die from preventable causes. And every child has the right to develop and to reach their full potential. Imagine if those weren't just empty words or visions, but actually a reality. And in just a few minutes, we will hear more about the road to achieve those goals. But before that, I will leave the word to Peter Friberg, Director of CITE. Thank you.
Thanks, Helena. I'm extremely happy to welcome you all to this morning breakfast meeting, presenting the, I think, great report that has been done, placing children at the center of Sustainable Development Goals. And that is a kind of novel thinking in trying to see what outside pediatric medicine really is also affecting the health of children. So this is an interdisciplinary approach. I'm very happy to do this also here at the Swedish Society of Medicine, and where I have been quite engaged also earlier. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity and a great pleasure to do this together with the society. It really is the warmth of my heart to be able to stand here as director of CITE and also the former president of the society. And I think that makes just the start of the this kind of collaboration and what we have achieved so far. So there's many things that both CITE and the Society of Medicine have in common. So I look forward to that in the future. CITE is a global health institute, 2.5 years old at this time. We are just a little child compared with the society, who is a bit adult, I think. And we have the privilege to get funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it's still ongoing. And also we have got additional support from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Our task and our mission is to strengthen the Swedish resource base regarding education and research in global health. And so the Swedish universities and the facts and knowledge are the cornerstone of our work, providing as good as we can evidence-based policies in various kind of fields, and this is now one of them. And it's important to point out, as also Helena did, that the vision is really to contribute to health and well-being globally for all, and in particular for vulnerable groups, and that includes also, of course, women and children. So this is what this is actually about, this roadmap for children. Extremely important task. And this work started 2 years ago. And it was quite difficult. I mean, for us at least, for the first time, trying really to work in the interdisciplinary way. And that is not just so easy as one might imagine. You can come from different areas and you provide the input and do some kind of mix. But then from doing it from the start, discussing from each other's respective agendas, and to mix that early on, this is quite a challenge. And we have a good help, I mean, with the SDGs, also from the Stockholm Environment Institute with Måns Nilsson. So that was a big help, and Måns is also on the panel today. So I think that many of you have also encountered that kind of struggle, which interdisciplinary work is. But it's not just the interdisciplinary work as such, it's the continuation. What kind of impact will this have? Will it change guidelines? Will it change routines and recommendations for work? That is what actually counts long term. So I see this as a start of something, this report as a start of something. And it's also important to notice, just a few days ago, another roadmap came out from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine from the US. A roadmap to reducing child poverty. And that is for the United States. So there are a lot of very interesting and exciting and important documents out there. And we are in the right game here. And I'm so happy for this. And it's really a joy and a great importance. So now we will listen to what's in there, actually. And I will leave the word to Anders Nordström, who will be the moderator today. And he will guide us through this in a very nice and challenging way, I'm sure. Please, Anders. And again, warm welcome to all of you.
Thank you very much. Don't promise too much. I will try to do my best. I was very excited when I got the report. I'd seen draft of it, and I think both from a substantive point of view, but also from a layout point of view, it's very nice, very exciting. Excellent also illustrations in the report that I know that many of us will use. Also presenting data and information in a slightly new way. That was really, really useful. This is about the SDGs. Some of us are old enough to have been working on the MDG agenda, on the Millennium Declaration and the MDGs. There is a reason why we now have a new agenda. I mean, we made huge progress during the MDG, 15 years from 2000 to 2015, focusing on children, focusing on reducing child mortality, huge progress in the world. Today, we have a different agenda. We have an Agenda 2030 with 17 goals. There is only one, and some people were quite concerned that there is only one health goal, but it's a very, very different health goal. It's a goal about ensuring that people can live long and healthy lives. And that starts at the very beginning. If you're going to be able to live a long and healthy lives, you need to start at the beginning. And I think this report provides an opportunity to begin to discuss, to understand, and to get the tools to see how can we create those conditions for the children and for the parents to create that kind of environment, enabling us to live long and healthy lives. Because the big picture is that, yes, we have seen progress in the world in terms of health. We're living longer, but we are not being healthier at the same path. So we're getting more lives, but not necessarily more healthy lives. In Sweden, we're doing quite okay. If we look globally, we're not doing so okay. So what the SDG agenda and the SDG 3 gives us is an opportunity to focus not just on surviving, but ensuring that we stay healthy. And there are a lot of reasons for this. But this is then, I would say, an increased ambition. But it's an important ambition because this is about, of course, you as an individual, that you can stay healthy, but it's also important for society. Those are costs for the healthcare. This has to do with people being productive. If you are healthy, you can also work and you can produce. So there are totally different kinds of dimensions with the SDG agenda compared to what we have with the MDG agenda. Then, of course, we need tools. We need to understand. It's easy to say that everything is linked. Everything is relating to everything. We have 17 goals, all goals are connected in some way or the other. Then we can just say that everything depends on everything and we don't know even where to start. So we need some more structured way of working, knowing how actually to make use of this. How do we ensure that we have a situation where we benefit from what we're doing on the climate side? We had the day before yesterday, we had lunch with the Prime Minister here and Gunnel Stordalen and Johan Rockström, speaking about the links in between food, health and climate. Okay, a very tangible agenda, seeing how important food is for people's health, but also for the climate. And we can then look at the co-benefits and seeing by advancing now with different thinking around food, we can get those impacts. And to find those ways of seeing the links in between the different SDGs here, but not just in general, but at a very practical and tangible way. And I think this report gives us, and we will listen to Tobias in a minute, gives us that opportunity. Sweden, and some of you have heard me and others speaking about the work that we did already, we launched already last year, which is, I would call it a new agenda for Sweden when it comes to our engagement on global health, building on 3 pillars. Building on Agenda 2030, saying that Sweden is already playing a reasonable role when it comes to global health, but we can do actually even more. We can do even more by using the whole SDG framework, but also then moving beyond what we do in terms of development assistance and development cooperation. That is still important, but we are doing much more than that. One small example that we're going to get into here when we speak about children, diabetes. One of the most important health challenges in the world today, most rapidly growing among the NCDs. This has not been considered to be part of global health, but it is. This is a disease that is really related to your socioeconomic standard, what you're eating, where you're living, your living conditions, and this is a disease very much linked to poverty. In Sweden, in the US, and in very many other countries as well. So the agenda is changing, and that is what we're trying to do now with this roadmap or report that we presented last year for Swedish engagement on global health. And that report presents 3 pillars. One is around the preventive, the public health work, trying to see what can we do from a Swedish side to enable people again to make more healthy choices for themselves. When it comes to physical activity, when it comes to smoking, when it comes to food, but also issues that are the more broader determinants, which has to do possibly then more with gender equality. I see Sigrun sitting here, about how do you also, what can you do, or what's the links in between the security situation in a certain setting. Security is important for people, both for access to healthcare, but also for your mental well-being. That is really affecting people. So that is the first pillar, looking at the broader determinants of health. The second pillar is about health service, access to health service. And you know, there's a big meeting in New York now in a couple of weeks' time around universal health coverage. And the last one is about global health security, dealing also with now a different situation when it comes to global threats. Ebola being the most obvious one right now, but there are different kinds of threats and emergencies that we need also to be able to respond to. We are going to now have Tobias to present the report, and then we will have a panel discussion with 4 colleagues here, and then hopefully we will have also an engaged discussions with comments and questions from everyone here, because I see a lot of people that I know are very much engaged in this. So, Tobias, please.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Anders, and putting this into the context. So now I have 20 minutes when I will try and introduce placing children at the center of the Sustainable Development Goals, this roadmap from SITE and the Swedish Society of Medicine. And I thought this is Friday, most people, you're back from holidays, so we should start and think together. So I have 3 quick questions for you to set the scene to understand how many children do we have and what are we actually talking about. So please, everybody, take your phones and go to kahoot.it. Kahoot.it, and if you don't get into it, take a colleague you're sitting next to and use that phone and work together. And at the moment we're thinking and my computer is thinking, and it's always nice to see. And once you are at kahoot.it, you enter the PIN code 237381. And the network is thinking. Technology, huh? Christian? No internet. I'm sorry about this. 1 minute. It's everyone. Now, we're in there. Okay? No, you will get the code, I promise you. (715603). Go to kahoot.it, and if you don't get in with your phone, use your colleagues who actually have some connections. We have 3 quick questions to set the scene. 715603. Oh, we have 1 player. 3, great. 6, 7, 8. Wonderful. We're getting going. It's just use your phone. That's the best here. Otherwise, there are too many people. And if you don't get in, use a colleague and just work together. It's great. We'll give it 10 seconds more, and otherwise, if you're not connected, take a colleague, and we'll have a look. Lovely. Close to 50 players. That's half of you. We'll start. You can always join later. Are you ready for the first question? Very important. First question is, how many children are born each year in the world? We need to know that. Otherwise, we don't know what we're talking about. Is it 10 million, 70 million, 140 million, or 400 million? 20 seconds. How many children are born each year in the world? In Sweden, we have 100,000 children approximately born every year. Okay, that was a hint. Very close, 2 seconds to go. Okay, let's have a look. Oh, lovely. You're a knowledgeable crowd. About 140 million children are born in the world each year. Very, very good. Let's continue. Helena, you're quick. How many children die every year before their 5th birthday in the world? Approximately, again, just rough estimates. Is it 1 million, 3 million, 5 million, or 10 million? Before the 5th birthday of all children that are born alive each year in the world. It's great, you're quick, you're fast. 5 seconds to go. Some more to answer. Great, final, that's good. Look, again, more than half of you have the right answer. About 5 million children die before their 5th birthday every year in the world. One final question. In the world today, there are approximately 2 billion children out of the 7.5 billion people alive. How many children will there be in 2100, in 80 years from now? Is it 2 billion, 3, 4, or 5? How many children? And here we count children as everybody between the age of 0 and 18. Comparing today with the future. I have 1 second to go. Okay. Wow, here we had, this was interesting. All answers got more or less the same. But it's 2 billion. We have the same number of children in the future as today. Approximately 2 billion. So now we know how many children we have in the world. We know how many children that are born every year. And we know how many children that die. That's 3 basic facts I think it's important for all of us to bring forward when we discuss this report. Great. Then we can go back to the presentation, Christian. Well done, everybody. So, now we have this report, and how did we get here? It all started, as Peter said, 2 years ago, when CITE initiated a roundtable discussion to meet with an interdisciplinary working group to discuss global child health post-2015. What could CITE and what could Sweden do to change what we're doing in global child health? And at that meeting, we created a writing and working group, an interdisciplinary working group, with members representing pediatrics, global health, public health, psychology, environmental sciences, and economics. And we started working. We started with quite an extensive literature review of the very extensive literature on the field. And then we continued, started drafting, having discussions in an iterative process back and forth about what we want to do and how can we use the Sustainable Development Agenda to improve global child health. And every 3 to 6 months, we took what we had, presented it at national or international meetings, and discussed it and got feedback. And then we got a first draft that we went back to the round table with a bigger group, discussed that, got feedback, sent it out for an external review with some global health leaders, and then finalized the report. And now we have it here. And this is just the first step, and a very important one to get the input from the panel and all of you, how we can use what we have in this report. And now we have 20 minutes and try and present our key findings from the report. When we started this work, we had just finalized the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, as Anders mentioned. And we had to start here. We had to look back and see what had worked, what had not worked, and what do we need to do differently. And when we looked back, exactly as Anders said, we had seen a great reduction in under 5 mortality. Approximately a reduction in 50%, from 12 to 6 million in 25 years. Great success, but still, we had not reached the MDG 4 of reducing child mortality by 66%. So we still had 5 million children every year dying, most of them due to causes that we could easily prevent. And then we had just gotten the Sustainable Development Goals, this global agenda that all world leaders promised to deliver on. That can really change, but how should we use this best for global child health? And again, as Anders said, it's easy for everybody to say we need to do things differently. That's correct, but how to do things differently and what should we do? That were our key questions. And we have one specific goal on child mortality, target 3.2, which is end all preventable deaths under the age of 5, with a very specific target, aiming to reduce neonatal mortality to at least as low as 12 per 1,000 live births, and under 5 mortality to at least as low as 25 per 1,000 live births. Very ambitious that all countries, but not impossible if we deliver correctly. And then we all agreed very quickly that the Sustainable Development Goals, they are not the Millennium Development Goals 2.0. We need to do things differently, and now let's deliver on how to do these things differently. And then, early on, we found a paper published in 2017 by Lars-Åke Persson and colleagues from Bangladesh, Rwanda, Nicaragua, and Vietnam. I'm very happy to see Lars-Åke here. And what they had done, they had taken real numbers from these countries, looking at under 5 mortality and neonatal mortality, followed it all the time from 1970 to 2015, and looking at what had actually happened in the countries. And what we could see there, that was that, yes, mortality curves show dramatic reductions over time. But when we see these global curves, it looks like the only way a curve can go, it's down. Nothing else can happen. But when we looked in these countries, yes, they can go up and down. And during wars and catastrophes, the genocide in Rwanda, flooding in Bangladesh, bad economies in Nicaragua and Vietnam, child mortality is going up. And we could see it was rapidly reduced by targeted interventions, multi-sectoral development efforts, and community engagement. So we got, in just this paper, we got some of the key concepts that they wanted to working on. And then, during the time we worked, we could see the civil war in Syria with exactly what was happening, a higher middle-income country going into war, the whole society collapsing, under 5, and neonatal mortality going up and being much, much higher now. Not just because of the war, because that the whole society collapsed. We saw the same in Venezuela, 20 years of child mortality reductions being swiped away during 2 years just because of bad management of the economy. And we could follow climate change and future scenarios to see how, if complete failure of food and water security in countries could swipe out again all the gains we had in child mortality. So this was one of our main starting points. The other starting point was that we went back. Everybody is working in child health during the last 20 years. This has been the starting point of almost all papers, all theses I've seen. This is the under 5 mortality divided up by causes of deaths. And this is good if you just want to focus on under 5 mortality. But what we said, let's look at the bigger picture. You're a child from when you're born until the age of 18. Although we all know that the frontal cortex is not completely developed until the age of 25, we said we have to stop somewhere. Let's look at the child between the age of 0 and 18. And instead of just looking at mortality, we wanted to look at mortality and morbidity combined into DALYs, and the global burden of disease was to become what we wanted to have a look at. This is difficult to see on the screen, but you all have it in the report here. And here we can see that the first week of life represents 7% of all morbidity and mortality during life. So just the first week of life is 250 times more dangerous than any other week in life. So being born, it's the most dangerous moment in life. And then if you have survived the first week, the coming 51 weeks during the first year, they represent another approximately 7% of the total morbidity and mortality. Then we need another 4 years to get up to another 7%. Then we need 10 years, and then we need another 10 years, which we cut up into 2 different halves. And we think this is representing the true morbidity and mortality in children. And if we look at the causes of morbidity and mortality, in the first week here, we have being born too early, preterm, and not getting enough oxygen at delivery. You need specific interventions to work here. The first year here, we have low respiratory infections, pneumonia, and diarrhea. And then we get malaria, diarrhea, and pneumonia. And then when we move up here to the teenagers, which I think we could call adolescents or teenagers. It's very rare when I work at hospital and I meet a 16-year-old boy or a girl and I call them a child. It's not working out very well. But here, our teenager It's road injuries, headache, self-harm, and depression. So we need very different interventions over the continuum of a child's life. This was our second big starting point. And then we also said, okay, we have said this, things should be done differently, we need to do things differently, but how? And then we said we need to use the SDGs, and we said, let's put the child in the center of the SDGs. And that's what we did. And then we put it in this figure, from pregnancy, being born, being a small child, being an adolescent, being an adult, and then becoming maybe parents and get their own children. And how the biosphere, the society, the economy will support the growing child or be a problem for the growing child, but hopefully support the growing child and the families. And then all around this, the partnerships that we need to deliver on. That was our first starting point. And what we called that was redefining global child health in the post-2015 era. And here we discussed a lot about climate change, as I said before, society, war, and the economy, that you need the economy to support this. That was our first starting point. The second point was striving for equity. Although we want to look at things differently, we were well aware that when we looked at under 5 mortality and the MDG goal, this was not finished business. We still have huge differences. 4 out of every 5 children that die before the 5th birthday is in sub-Saharan Africa or in South Asia. And a child born in sub-Saharan Africa at the moment have 30 chances high risk of dying before the 5th birthday than a child in Sweden. So we could not forget the unfinished agenda of the high mortality in the poorest countries in the world. So although we need to do things differently, we need to continue to deliver on what has actually working well and expanding that to other countries. That was the second bullet point that we thought very, very important. Striving for the equity and also looking at countries, it's just national averages, and we need to know that inside countries there are large proportions sometimes which are much poorer and less well off than others, and we need to look at subnational data to also catch these children. The third one was enabling a child's right to thrive throughout the life course. And here we thought, let's go back to this figure and let's get this, that this should be now the global standard. When we discuss global child health, it's not the pie chart of under 5 mortality, but this is the growing child from pregnancy, work closely with our maternal colleagues, through delivery and through the 18 years. And then, as Anders said, all what we do here will influence our future and how we live as individuals and in our societies. That was the third, enabling a child's right to thrive through the life course. The fourth point was bridging the no-do gap, facilitating evidence-informed policymaking and implementation. And here again, we know that approximately 2/3 of child mortality could be reduced by interventions we already have. We just need to deliver on them. And here, we looked at a figure where we want to show that this is also not only for health sector policies, but for all intersectoral policies, how we can start and change behavior and environmental factors. Everything from indoor smoke, outdoor smoke, to climate change. And here, when we looked at the health sector, it has been a large focus on access to healthcare. And this is not enough. At the moment, 60% of the mortality and morbidity is due to poor quality. Children have access to healthcare, but they don't get the quality they need. So we need both the access and the quality of care. And all this to improve health outcomes. The final one, maybe the most difficult one, it's again, as Anders started the discussion with, how can we capitalize on interlinkages to galvanize interdisciplinary action? Because again, everybody says that we need to do things differently, we need to use the SDGs, we should work together, but how should this work be done? And this was very much influenced by Måns Nilsson and his colleagues from the Stockholm Environmental Institute, who had looked at interlinkages and scoring systems. How can different sectors best work together and get a discussion where it's not just that everybody should do everyone. This is not from the child health field, but this is from another exercise, looking at different goals and how they are interlinked, and if they're positively interlinked or negatively interlinked. And we did a similar exercise with a group of colleagues, again interdisciplinary, and looking at how can we capitalize on the linkages between other sustainable development goals for the child health goal. And that was, again, much more difficult to work, because suddenly we had that discussion with economists, with environmental scientists, where I'm not really used to the discussions. It's much easier just to discuss pneumonia interventions. But this was very interesting and very good. And what we got up to was that there are a few negative interactions showing the limited number of trade-offs within health, and particularly maybe within child health, and working to reduce poverty, hunger, better education, gender equality, decent work, and partnerships are all very beneficial, both for child health and for these other goals. And what we also concluded was that health is not only an outcome, but also a driver of progress in other SDGs. So it's a win-win situation if you look at this carefully. And this was done at a global level, and now we have to continue working with examples and see how we can use this at country level and subnational level. So these were our generic discussions. And then we started also to try and exemplify. So you can see in the report, after each section, we have put opportunities for action, where we have between 4 and 6 different concrete actions for each of these 5. And I don't want to start going through them, because I'm really curious to hear what you have and what you see and what the panel see and how we can use this work, instead of going into our discussions more specifically. And we believe if we put the child in the middle of the SDGs, we can get the job done. But getting the job done, this was not something I did myself. We did this in the writing and working group, and it has been not always easy, but very interesting and a lot of learning for all of us. And I want to mention Johan, who is here today. David, he's back in Australia, but Daniel is here. Sofia is on maternity leave. Anna-Clara Hollander is on maternity leave. Mats is here. Sahar is here and will be in the panel. Peter is also on maternity leave, or paternity leave, maybe I should say. And I'm here. So I think it's very important to thank all of them, and we see that this group takes children very seriously. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Tobias. I think you will stay as well.
Yeah.
Yes, please. So can I invite then, as you said, Sahar, Åsa and Måns, and Cecilia to join us. We will basically speak about two things, 2 questions. We will also invite and engage all of you in the room here. One is to, based on this report and based on, I think many of you already have an understanding that we have a different agenda and we have a different future. What is the most important issue for global health when it comes to children? To talk about what is the issue, what would you like to see, I mean, your own work to focus on, possibly we as a community, Sweden, to prioritize more. It could be a specific issue, or it could be a certain process, a certain way of working, or a certain more of contextual factor that will really have an impact on children's health. So that's the first question we're going to talk about, and pushing you a little bit then to pick one. That's always difficult. So what is the thing that you think, looking into the future, next decade, what is really the top priority when it comes to how we can also make an impact when it comes to children's health? The second is then question we're going to discuss is more based on this report, and as Tobias was saying and as I was saying, in some way the methodology here, looking at the SDGs, the interlinkages. I mean, what is it from this report that you would like to pick up on? What is of interest? Is there something that we can do more work on? How can we take this forward? Do you have any suggestions? I mean, based on this, does this provide us with new opportunities? So, I mean, from the report, is it anything specific? Not the issues, the topics, but more how the report presents child health that you feel that we should think about and we should do some more work on. So those are the 2 questions. But let me then introduce Tobias. You know already. Sahar is working as a pediatrician, and you've been working for MSF across the world, and now you're working on planning of pediatric care in Stockholm. Yeah. So at least we know what we need to plan for. We will have equal number of children also in the future, that we know now. So I suppose we need equal number of hospital beds and pediatricians and all of that. So, I mean, that should be quite a simple work then. No, okay. And then we have Åsa, and a special welcome, I would say, to Åsa. Åsa is now the new lead for health and sexual reproductive health and rights at SIDA. Some of you know Pia Engstrand, who was having this job before. So Åsa has just started this very important role to be the focal point and the driver for health and sexual reproductive health at Swedish SIDA. Then Cecilia, you are the program director then for SOS Barnbyar. Yes. Very much welcome. And Måns, you said before we came in here, you don't know anything about health. I think that's very good. As I was saying, just the day before yesterday, we had this lunch with the Prime Minister, with Stefan Löfven, and we spoke a lot about issues that was not really health, but has an enormous impact on health and also on children's health. So I'm very happy that we have somebody who's not from the normal gang, but is really bringing in this perspective of what the other SDGs are bringing to the agenda. So should we start with you, Åsa, as you are a little bit of a newcomer in your new role and fresh eyes, perhaps? So, I mean, what are, from your perspective, most important for children's health looking ahead?
Okay, thanks, Anders. And it's difficult to choose just one thing to discuss, but I'll do quickly to one. Because I think the immediate sort of importance is the quality of care. Now, if you have read the report, you see the staggered figures of having 66% of the mortalities just due to quality of care. For us who have been out there working in the field, in our countries, in the low-income countries, we know the importance of really improving the quality of care. So I think that's an extremely important immediate sort of issue to it. And then, of course, working for SIDA, I can't say anything else than poverty, you know. Looking at, we just had our chief economist presenting us with some new figures around, you know, looking ahead. Where are the poor people in 2030? She had just used the income indicator and not sort of the multidimensional poverty index that we are using in SIDA, but just the income. And what she saw that 80% of them will remain in sub-Saharan Africa. And that is if you use the 190. But then if you're going higher, up to almost 590, you know, is that $6, you know? Living on that a day, you can see that that shift is almost equal then, 80% more will be in South Asia. So, and also, you know, the most of them will then remain in the low income. So I think, and then the poverty linked to the nutrition, the other part of it. But I think that is something we need to look to think of, all of us that are working and trying to address the issues, you know, also the geographical focus of where do we need to address the poverty.
But on your second one, I didn't 100% understand that. So you mean that where economies are changing and that we have more middle-income countries, or what do you mean? Or is it that we...
If you look at 2030,
yeah.
You know, most of the sort of extreme poverty, below 190, will live,
yeah.
Still live in
yeah.
Africa, where many of our are focusing our work. That's my point. We also need to look at, if you go up to 590 using that as a measurement, we'll then have to shift to South Asia and the more middle-income countries, and that's where we may not think where we are working at the moment. So you have to start off also seeing the trends. Where do you have to focus, geographical focus on trying to address poverty that well?
So we might get back to Tobias about some of the figures here. Where are actually those children living? Are they still living in the poorest countries, or are the majority of the children no longer living in the poorest countries? Then, of course, you get into the question about who should do something about that, who's that responsibility. But it's important to know the facts. Okay, very good. Should we move to Cecilia, from your perspective then? I mean, what do you feel that are the most important issue for children's health looking ahead?
Well, I think the holistic perspective on child health. And just for everybody to maybe not know that Children Villages International, we work with one of the most vulnerable target groups in the world, groups of youth. Children that have lost or are at the risk of losing parental care, and we do that in 136 countries. So what I mean when you say the holistic perspective is that I would like to give an example. One of the main SDGs we work to contribute to is 8.6, which says that by 2020, substantially reduce the proportion of youth not in employment, education, or training. But in order to succeed with that, these youths have to be employable. And if you're going to, so they have to have a stable mental and physical health to start with. And we see in many of our vocational trainings we have for youths that maybe these children have received good enough health care, good enough nutrition, but they lack detachment to grown up, which means that they have had problems with the mental development. They have not developed as their peers. So to be able to assimilate education or training, you also have to have this relationship with grown-ups. And so health has so many different layers, and not only nutrition or healthcare and education. And we also have to remember that children and youth are dependent on grown-ups and the society. And I really want to stress the importance of respecting and seeing and meeting the children's rights and needs all up to the age of 18.
So you would say that we're doing quite okay when it comes to healthcare, quality of care, as Åsa was saying. What is more important is to ensure that you have a positive, solid social environment for children when they grow up, and that's more of a priority if we're going to work on global health.
Well, we have to have all of them, of course.
But you need to pick one now.
Well, that's why I meant with the holistic perspective, because you cannot forget the relationship, the attachment that children and youth needs. So you also, if they don't have parents, then you have to find another kind of grown-up or attachment. But then you also have to work, if they have parents, work with the parents.
Let's come back to this question about taking a holistic approach, and I mean basically working on all 17 goals. They are important for children, of course, but are there challenges, are there problems with that approach? I mean, what we did during the MDG agenda was focusing on one thing, and we're no longer going to do that, so that's not an option. But the question is, how can we be successful also to be able actually to make a difference with that challenge, that we know that everything is interrelated. I will wait for the most last then, because you don't know anything about health.
Rub it in.
Sahar, you have seen a lot of things in reality, especially when you've been, I suppose, both working here in Sweden. You've seen a lot of realities for children here in Sweden, but also in other countries. So what are your top priority? What do you think we should focus on?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for also for my brain to go through this. I chose to choose a number of points that I see are kind of looming and that we need to address. And I will be fast, so I won't go into detail. But first of all, of course, putting the child in the center of our policy is the most important thing. Obvious for everyone in here, and also me as a pediatric public health advisor. But every day I have to remind myself, like this, we decided today. So I remind myself every day of this, putting the child and the child's rights at the center. And from January 2020, the Convention of the Rights for bigger decisions. But so a number of issues, of course, climate change, how it affects natural disasters, droughts, how they affect malnutrition and child health, and access to healthcare, both of pregnant mothers and children. Prevention of wars. We have these war games going on, the war games of words right now, but But we are not immune to war, and we saw what happened with Syria, what happened to former Yugoslavia. We could never expect that, but it did happen, and it was at our back door, and we are also affected by that. So, of course, prevention of war, and we know that children and pregnant women are 14 times more affected, or die more in wars than the men do from direct war. The next thing is antimicrobial resistance, and it particularly affects the newborns. With their immature immune systems, they are particularly vulnerable to infections, and they can die very fast from this. And when I worked in India a couple of years ago, I was shocked. For me, this is a ticking bomb. There were, in the pediatric ward, they were treated with last-line antibiotics, every child. And I'm not blaming those doctors. They do that because they think this is the only thing that works here. But it just takes one turn that this antibiotic becomes resistant, and there is nothing else. And antibiotic resistance sees no boundaries. So it will affect all of us, and it's a true global question that needs to be addressed. And today in India only, it's estimated that 60,000 newborns are dying annually just due to antimicrobial resistance. The next thing is access to vaccines, and this question has two legs. It's the trust issue, which we also see now affect in Europe, how coverage is reducing. We have 4 countries now a couple of days ago. Well, one of them is the UK, where measles is no longer classified as measles-free. There's also a pricing issue of vaccine. So the price of the basic childhood package has increased 68 times since 2001. Well, partly because we've added vaccine to the basic package that WHO is recommending, but all the children need to be accessing this. And I know Gavi is important, but all those countries that become middle-income countries, they fall off the Gavi cliff, and then they might not be able to provide the same vaccines. And 2 of the most expensive vaccines is the pneumococcal vaccine and the HPV vaccine. So you can read more about this in the Access Campaign website of MSF. I won't go into details anymore.
Now we got 3 proposals from
Okay,
here, both
so
in preventing wars, AMR, and vaccines.
I'll just say that for those of you who are interested in clinical issues, go into the Pediatric Days website, because there we've lifted the most important clinical issues, and we're continuing to do that every time we have the conference. Okay.
Thank you. Let's come back also to your, I mean, we said 1, but you gave 3 very interesting examples in terms of what does insecurity, continuous war means, AMR, and vaccines. They're quite different. And let's come back to that in a minute. But AMR, in some way, that's a good entry point for Måns. Antibiotic resistance, that's an issue that has to do with livestock. How do we produce our food? This is a very clear link to our environment. I don't know whether you would pick that as one of your priorities, but coming more from an environmental and climate perspective, what's your priority when it comes to creating conditions for better lives for children?
Yes, a challenging question here for me, but it's been so inspiring. I want to start with saying that, to be involved with CITE and working through this conceptualization of taking the broader 2030 agenda perspective into account. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves first that this establishment of the 2030 agenda in 2015 was a bit of a miracle, actually, considering where the world is now in the multilateral cooperation. It would never, ever happen in 2019. And I have to say, even in 2015, I'm seriously doubting that countries actually read the document before they signed it back home in the capitals, considering the ambition level and the statements that are put in there. And we should be grateful for that. Almost all the world's countries have signed on to this. And of course, it's not the most rigorous or sort of well-formulated articulation of human needs and aspirations. So it poses some challenges when we attack it from a research perspective. But it's good to work with, and in particular this way that it emphasizes interlinkages and interdependencies on the one hand, and the universality on the other hand, that it's not just a poor country agenda, it's an agenda for every country in the world. Our problems are different, and at different levels, but we are sharing many of the issues and many of the dilemmas, both like whether you're in Burkina Faso or in Sweden. And I want to raise, for example, the social determinant relating to gender equality, where we see, of course, at different levels of gravity or and different ways, this is truly a universal way, a universal problem. We treat boys and girls differently in the health system and in the education system, which in turn drives outcomes in health as well as in education. And as we know, the connections between health and education are also very strong. So that's one of my sort of favorite
But that's
items.
a good one. That's a very specific one.
And the second one, which links a lot to our work at the Stockholm Environment Institute, is the access to clean water, access to sanitation, and access to clean energy, which are all in different ways driving also, for example, malnutrition, respiratory disease through the air pollution coming from traditional energy sources. Not just respiratory, actually. This is this mounting evidence base about how it affects learning ability, mental health, and even things like preterm births as a result of pollution. And it's driving educational performance, of course, as well as direct health outcomes. So these are things that really gel together for us who work on the environmental and sort of trying to find solutions to climate change, water resources management, etc. Very direct and strong connections to this agenda here.
Thank you. Think about food also for the future. Tobias, I mean, you've been doing this work today compared to when you started this. Do you make a different priority now?
Yes and no, I would like to say. And the big difference is really what I think is a bit what Sahar said there. It's so easy for us working on child health that we see the child in the middle of the SDGs and that we always should prioritize the child. But how can we get that outside our little? And I believe that almost all of you who are here today also believe that, oh, this is nonsense. For sure we should do that. And for sure, I mean, we should think about this with the child in the middle. But how do we get this into policies, into action? That's my big question. And I think it's so important that we understand that just because we are global health people or pediatricians, that we believe that this is the truth. But how do we get that interaction with other players in the society? And there, I think the framework that Måns and colleagues developed at the Stockholm Environmental Institute, how to get a discussion between different stakeholders and not just sitting and having parallel discussions. That's a possibility to get that in maybe global level, and even more important, I think, is at the national level, we need that discussion. And not just here in Sweden. Having that framework and work on that in developing and in getting it done. That's the big change for me.
So your big priority is how we do it and how we get it done and the way we are basically working. So, and that's a little bit more into the second question. So let's get back to that. But just a few comments around more, what are priorities for children's health if we look ahead 10, 20 years? Because in some way, you raise one of the targets under SDG 3 here, which has to do with avoidable child mortality. But I said in my introduction saying that the overall SDG is not just about mortality, it's actually about also ensuring that children and people can stay healthy. And I'm chairing right now a strategy committee for what is called the Partnership on Maternal and Child Health. We have got Zulfi Bhutta on that, I've got Zulfi Bhutta in that committee, and we have quite a heated debate here about, we have an unfinished agenda, we have still children dying, and we need to continue to focus on that full stop. To do more broader work, also looking at what are potentially the risk factors that are affecting children at early days that will have an impact on you when you grow up, okay? That's another agenda. Let's not deal with that now. We still have an unfinished agenda. And from me, my perspective is that, I mean, if you look at the bigger global burden of disease, if you go beyond the 18 years, the explosion is in the world is, of course, of NCDs, of diabetes, cancers, coronary heart diseases. And this is no longer diseases for rich people. These are really diseases for poor people. And a lot needs to happen already at early days. Child obesity is being one of the biggest challenges today in the world. But the question is then, what do you think? What should we focus on from a Swedish perspective? One is to continue with what we call the unfinished MDG agenda, continuing with the 5.7 million children dying every year, which is important. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. Or should we also try to do something more than that? What's your views? Yes, Sarah. So there's more structural issues in society, basically. Yeah. 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 Okay. Let's get a couple of more new comments or views. Please, I don't know your name.
My name is Elisabeth Ekener at KTH. I was thinking about agency, leverage and influence for children. I think where we're now looking at climate change is the most obvious one, the huge long-term impacts. And with Greta Thunberg and the Fridays for Future movement, it's obvious that children are going to live in the future, but they have no influence on the decisions that are taken now. So I think it's important to think about how to give children more leverage in the decision making in the world. And I think that is also probably very much linked to mental health issues. When you see your future is at stake and no one is acting and you cannot do anything about that, that must be very, very stressful. I think that's a very important issue.
Thank you. Very good. Please. The row behind there. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Gorka Fagild. I also work at CEDA. I wanted also to present a question to Tobias regarding the priority 5 on the interlinkages. And we see a lot of focus on some specific goals, or these are listed as examples: hunger, poverty, employment, gender equality. Very welcome. But I also miss a bit on this connection that many of our colleagues here have presented on the connection to SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. Because even though it's really important that we focus on this broader continuum of life, we still know that under 5 mortality is very much related to water and sanitation diseases, as many of my colleagues have presented here, even Sahar with the connection to AMR, and this is kind of somehow also low-hanging fruits within the health sector that we need to, health and interdisciplinary approach that we need to continue working on. And just a bit on the disability perspective, because we're still considering here children, different age groups, but I know we cannot cover it all, but still we're discussing it with my colleague Lisa that works on the humanitarian department, and we still see this missing, that we're still again, aggregating the group within the same category, and there are different needs and perspectives, and that's kind of missing a bit on the report. Can you give a bit on your perspective?
Okay, let's get 2 or 3 more comments. It was a very interesting report launched by the World Bank beginning of World Water Week now about the impact of quality of water, including on children, especially the content of salt in water. I think that was new. Lars-Åke, and then there and there.
Addis Ababa. During the Millennium Development Goal era, in research, in the beginning we very much looked at single interventions. Later on, it was discovered that you need to have combinations of various actions. And I think towards the end of that era, we were even starting to do implementation science type of research, looking at more complex interventions, etc. Now, when we have this perspective of the Sustainable Development Goals, we think that we know that if you move some of these boxes, we do something about gender equality, we get some positive health effects on children. Yes, we have some observational studies. We have actually very limited knowledge of non-medical interventions in order to get effects on child health. And I think it's time to discuss and try to suggest a research agenda regarding the interlinkages between all these boxes and the possibility of influencing child survival, child growth, child thriving, and overall health by non-medical interventions. So maybe that's a next task for Swedish Institute for Global Health Transformation, a research agenda within the SDG era.
Very good. Thank you very much. Concrete suggestions. I know you, but I don't remember your name. That's right. And then we take one more, and then we'll get back here, because we have one more question I'd like to get some perspectives on.
Thank you. And just quickly, I'm Anna from REACT, Action on Antibiotic Resistance. So that's my background. Thanks just everyone for the report. It's really great. I've been leafing through it. Coming back to the question about the holistic perspective, we see the same thing with antibiotic resistance. The emergence of it, the worsening of it, is due to so many different factors that there's really something we have to address the system as a whole. Coming back to what Anders was saying, should we focus only on actual diseases, or should we focus more wider? And I think it's necessary to do both. We need to guide countries on simple interventions they can do to target specific diseases, but we also need to focus on changing the system at the same time. It's not possible to do just one or the other. But for that, we need to also mobilize resources, and we need to be able to, as Sam alluded to, measure what we're doing, what has an effect. And just as a little concrete thing again then, WHO has advanced a new indicator on antibiotic resistance to be considered for the Sustainable Development Goals. It's very unusual that they open up the framework, but it's gone through the first round. open consultation right now until the 6th of September. So if it's as many organizations or private people could go in and like kind of vote for that, that it should be included, that would be great. Because if we can get that into this SDGs, that would make a huge difference. Thank you.
Thank you. And gentleman over there.
If you need links, contact me afterwards.
Fredrik Lindkrona from Salar and Region Stockholm. I'm really pleased that the report is so well written and conceptually strong when it comes to doing this interdependence sort of illustrations. I'm also really pleased that mental health is now much more talked about. I do think that we have to recognize that we now expanded the NCDs to another, so we're talking about the 5x5 matrix. And the point to making that case is also to showing that that's actually what, if you're looking at the conversations going on, reaching back to the macroeconomic development, you're looking at the whole conversation around beyond GDP. You're talking about the whole well-being agenda, and what's the most important aspect in many countries for well-being, and that what motivates people to drive this change forward is actually how they fare. So mind the mind, and even more strongly. I know scientists really bring it on the table, and I'd be happy to join that force even more strongly. So,
thank you. I mean, we have an interesting country very far from us, that's New Zealand, that have now put another different kinds of goal for Iceland as well. Okay, they are a bit closer then. Both are islands. So time is running, but I mean, basically, we get messages here that. If we're going to have an impact of children's health, there's quite a few things that we need to do, quite a few opportunities. The question is how we manage then, and as Lars-Åke was saying, possibly we need more research in terms of what works, but just based on the report, because you're trying to take a certain approach using a certain conceptual framework, methodology, to become a little bit more strategic, not just trying to do everything at once, but to find a more structured way of doing it. So back to the panel, what's your reflections in terms of how we can take that part of the report forward? Not the substance, but more the methodology, the approach of in a more systematic way using and working with SDGs. Who would like to start? Måns would like to start.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to highlight priority 4, bridging the no-do gap, and talking about evidence-informed policymaking and implementation. I think that what Lars-Åke says is extremely important before policymaking. We need to build the knowledge base about these interactions in a more systematic way that cuts across sectors in a way that I would say research councils have some difficulty funding today, and maybe journals have difficulty publishing in a way. Although I see there are positive movements in this. I think this awareness of the holistic systems view is very strong in society today, but as soon as you move into decision making, either in the ministries or in different agencies, you grind to a halt, and all the actors inside the system, they revert to their priority objectives, which are typically much more constrained and sectoral. And we keep saying that we need to have policy coherence and we need to have connections between the sectors and agencies. Some people talk about tearing down the silos, which I don't really agree with. I think we need the silos, but we need connections between them. But we rarely actually elaborate how it would move forward in practice. There's no sort of vision of how, if you talk about this case of child health in a broader sustainability context, what exactly are we expecting from SIDA or from the ministry, etc., or from the World Bank in terms of preparing and making decisions that can leverage the positive synergies and that can mitigate the trade-offs. So I think that would, for me, be a very important next step in the process. Getting more specific on how you do it, this systems view in decision making.
But what's your view in terms of how to do that? Because before you make the case to the bank or to SIDA, you need to be clear about what you would like.
Yeah.
And they don't know that. I know, I've been working there. They don't know. You need to be able to present that this is what would really work.
Yeah.
So what would you say in terms of how to advance this?
I would take some of the tools, some of the concepts that have been developed here and elsewhere, and those tools can take further steps in terms of becoming decision support in order to elaborate what would be the priority interlinkages, so to speak, that we need to work on, and put those at the front. Say these are the connections that you have to, these are the sectors that you have to partner with, and that's your job. Your job is not just this sectoral goal. Your job is.
But you say that sectors are important, goals are important, but you can provide more of a concrete roadmap to show that if you'd like to achieve this, you need to have this, this, and this, and this is more important than that.
And we have some limited evidence base in doing that, as Lars-Åke explained, but we have, I think, enough to take the first steps with the existing work that has already been done.
Should we continue with Cecilia? Any reflections from you in terms of more the approach in the report?
Moving forward.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to start with the recognition of basic civil registration, which I'm very happy about your pointing out in this report, because if no one should be left behind, then all children have to be counted. Otherwise, they risk not even get basic healthcare, care, or nutrition or education. They don't exist. And I would also, I'm very happy about priority 3, of course, the ability to enabling to thrive all through adolescence. But if we have to, moving forward from our care and child rights perspective, our programs, they have to evolve, because we have all these challenges. We meet climate, for instance, conflict, migration. And we cannot do this alone. We need researchers like Tobias, and we need corporate businesses. We need new solutions. So partnership, I think that's the only way forward. And I also think having this holistic perspective, mental health issues, exactly. That's the only way we're going to tackle all of these problems. Children cannot only survive, they have to thrive. So.
Very good. Thank you very much. Åsa.
And I don't know if we at SIDA don't really know what we're doing, but I do think we do know a bit. Anyway, I thought what I see of this report is a great opportunity, because what it flags out is the synergies and the need for the synergies. And at SIDA, we do have an ambition to strengthen those among our various departments. And I think what it also reflects, this report, is that it's not health alone that will do the trick here. It needs to really go with others. And I'm thinking about our huge support to UNICEF education, child protection. We have more than, I think last year, I had a figure here from them, I think they paid 1.5 billion Swedish crowns to UNICEF's both child protection and WASH support. UNICEF is working on CRSV. They are working on ending corporal punishment, other things in your report. They're working on the whole WASH agenda that some of you have highlighted. And that support doesn't sit within the health, it sits within the democracy unit. We also have other ongoing conversations, starting really to developing something now with the climate colleagues, the one working with environment and climate, to see how we can address those issues. We have colleagues looking at nutrition, the importance of nutrition. 45% of children are undernourished and died of due to nutrition.
Can I ask you then, what is health?
Well, health is a part of all that, of course.
So perhaps then we should talk about the health sector and health and make a distinction in between that.
The health sector,
Because you said that they are doing it, but that's not health. So I'm just sort of, possibly this could help us also move into an understanding about, if we talk about health.
Okay, I got you now.
You see my point?
Yes. So it's beyond the health sector. Okay. Is that what you want to say?
Yes.
But I also think, you know, the collaboration we have with our colleagues in gender, I think that's also extremely important. So even at CEDA, what I see now is this report is a good, excellent report to bring back to colleagues, getting the perspective of having child health also as an argument for or a better understanding when they are developing their own programs and in collaborations with that as the ones that are working in the health sector.
And you have also CEDA, have you working on 3 sustainability strategies on economic, sustainable development, social and environmental, and in some way those are again an opportunity to make those interlinkages in between different aspects of,
Yeah, and I do, you know, I think there is definitely an appetite for it now. The SDGs allow us to drive that sort of into the sectorial and into with all the other strategies. So I think it's an opportune time when this report is
Farah.
Okay, we've already spoken about equity, but I just want to add to that it's not just between countries, but also within countries and within regions that we see the differences and not looking just at averages, because then I wouldn't have anything to do here in Sweden if I look at the average, but look at the extremes because they put benchmarks for us and they also show you what is possible in this particular environment. But then also we need to identify interventions to address inequities, and that's really hard because inequity is so multidimensional, and then to have interventions, I mean, I'm struggling with this today. It's not only to inform parents about not smoking, there are so many other issues related to the smoking of a parent, like mental illness, like traumas, like also maybe possibilities in the local environment of how to stop smoking, and maybe cultural issues, social issues. So to reduce inequities is really hard, and we need to find methods that are multidimensional. So that's really an important topic. Then I want to say that we are living a little bit in an age where global health is challenged for its colonial roots. And then it's also the approach of how we deal with global health in other countries. That it shouldn't be that we are teaching other people or that we want to help other people. It should be from a solidaric perspective that if we want to do global health, it's because of solidarity, because we identify this problem as global. And this brings us to the chapter of the Swedish example, because I also think that for us to be legitimate, we need to also use what we are good at in Sweden. And I think a lot of things in the Swedish example chapter, like how we are preventive child health care, how our social policies like preschool and other social policies that together contribute to gender equality. And so that is what we should lift and focus on, and then also our approach, which should be we are doing this together. And I also agree with the no-do gap. It's a challenge for anyone who works with public health everywhere, and that the process of evaluating and it should be embedded in all programs that we start. But there's also another aspect to this, because having worked on the other side, on the programming side, sometimes we get frustrated with donors because they want to evaluate everything, and some things cannot be measured. So we also need to identify what things can't we measure. For example, building trust. I mean, this is the core of our child health system here in Sweden. But how do we prove, or how do we evaluate that we've built trust? Or now I'm struggling with that we are centralizing our baby clinics. And how do I prove that actually being present in the local neighborhood, knowing your neighborhood is important? It's so difficult to prove this or to have indicators for this. And so I think also from a donor perspective, it would be good also to identify, we can't measure this, but probably there is an effect. But we will not be able to write it down as a number. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So what you like to see happening next, Tobias, and then I will try to summarize and give some perspectives. But what you like now, when you listen to the discussion, you've done this work. Next steps from your side.
First, I would just like to answer a very
Yeah,
concrete
there was a question
about water and sanitation. And if you see one of the background papers that we published in BMJ last year, when we looked at interlinkages at the global, one of our 2 examples was exactly on water and sanitation, showing the importance, but also the difficulty sometimes working together and getting concrete results. Which is then leading to Lars-Åke's comment about that we need more research, because otherwise everybody will just say, that sounds good, but it's not efficient, it doesn't work. So we need to continue the research agenda. And we have started working on that. And looking at the work that you did, Måns and colleagues, on interlinkages, and I was working, first time when I actually read that paper, I thought it wasn't that, oh, this is nothing special, what is this? I wasn't very impressed. But then when we took it, started working and used it, I saw how useful that could be as a starting point for a discussion. And that's, I think, it's one of the tools that we can use, that you were asking for, Anders, that we have to bring to policymakers at the district level, at the national level, at the global level, to actually sit together with a framework, working through the SDGs, and see what will influence child health, what will lead to better health. And there we can be concrete, and we have a framework. But we need to try that out, and we will continue doing research and see what does work and what does not work. And then I would just like to build on one of the points there that Sahar, that you brought up, that we have to build on what we're good at here in Sweden. And now, in just 2 months' time, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child will celebrate 30 years. But still, the majority of countries in the world, corporal punishment is not illegal. And close to half of all children every year, they're more or less beaten up by their parents or by their teachers. And it's just shocking, I think. And 30 years ago, when this discussion took place here in Sweden, people said it's not possible to change. Parents, they have the right. How can you educate a child without just giving them a little bit? And now in Sweden, we don't accept that any longer. And I think if we can show that this is possible, otherwise we can't take involving children seriously if we still think it's all right to give them just like this. So I think if we can bring that forward also after this discussion, and it's one of the points in here, it's very specific. Someone might say that it's small in the bigger agenda, but I think it's so important, otherwise we don't have respect.
And that is possibly what influenced the possibilities for children most. Those are the values and cultures that we have in society, not just in terms of that, but more generally. I mean, values has to do with what we eat. Values has to do with what kind of, how to take care of your children. Values has to do with gender equality, how you treat boys and girls. And I think just one, this is more of a comment and reflection in terms of this, if we should do this from a solidarity point of view. I think we partly also should do this work from an egoistic sort of, a nationalistic sort of point of view. This is in the interest of Sweden. We have a lot to gain from this. This is no longer, I would like to skip the word donors. This is no longer only about sort of the old way that we used to work on development cooperation. This is a mutual common interest for us more collectively. If we look at just boys and girls, in many parts of the world, I mean, girls are lagging behind. They don't have the same opportunities. They don't have the same rights. In Sweden, it's the opposite. And by also engaging in an agenda where boys and girls have similar opportunities, to be able to thrive, I think we can also gain something by that, engaging in that work here in Sweden and connecting. To summarize and to come to an end, both thanking you very much, everyone, both for coming here and for you who have been part of the panel, and most important for everyone who has done enormous lot of work on this report. I think the messages are quite clear that if we're going to really to put the child in the center and to do what is best for children, it's both to ensure that we can continue the work to provide good quality, as Åsa was saying, healthcare, but we also need to look at the broader factors. You were bringing up, you spoke about, I thought it was very useful because they're very, in some ways simple, but still, the war situation, the security situation, the AMR situation, access to antibiotics, but also the problems with resistance, and then the vaccines. That illustrates that this is quite a broad agenda. And then what Sarah brought up, the more structural issues here, that what lies behind all of this. You can't, in some way, make real progress if you don't deal with equity issues, if you don't look and understand that how different socioeconomic sort of situations for people are really affecting the possibilities for children, the gender dimension, but also democracy. My minister now, when in the Foreign Ministry for Development Cooperation. He gave me a paper from Gothenburg researchers that I looked at the relationship in between democracy and health. And obviously, countries that have democratic system, they also have better health outcomes. Good knowledge. So we have a bit of evidence on one issue at least. So I think that's clear. But then as I was trying to challenge you and ourselves here, then we have a more complex agenda. Reducing child mortality with the tools we had in the health sector during the MDG era, with vaccination being one of the most important ones, but other tools, that was quite easy. That's almost like cheating if you would like to do the work. That's to vaccinate someone. But if you're serious about really improving the situation for children, then it's much more difficult and more complex. And I think what you have given us here, and that is something I had wished to have seen a little bit more in the report, is really this tool. So in a structured, organized way to see which of the MDGs, of the SDGs, will have more of an impact. Where do we start? If we're going to make the case for the World Bank or for SIDA or for whoever, for our Minister of Finance, okay, a way of doing this now, depending on the specific situation in the specific countries, let's start here. Here we will have more of an impact. I was speaking about the example of food. If we focus on how we produce our food, how we consume our food, the food waste, there are a number of things we can do concretely, and I can show to the Minister of Finance, you will have an impact here on the economy, you will have an impact on the climate, and you will have an impact on people's health. And to be able to show that. But then you don't need always to do everything at the same time, but you need a way of prioritizing and structuring this. Next step in terms of this work, I mean, you decide. I was asking you what you would like to do next. I can say more generally how we've been working on global health, and global health being really based on Agenda 2030, that this is a common interest for Sweden, and for what we can possibly do contributing to a better world, but also benefiting also for getting certain global actions in place. Based on the report we did last year, we have now 5, 6 different work streams up and running, dealing and addressing different issues. The approach has really been that if there is a number of partners coming from public sector agencies, us in the government, but also from the research side, from the NGO side, from the private sector side, that feel that here Sweden could really make a difference. Get together. I can do whatever to support, to facilitate, but we will not take the lead from the government. So somebody else taking a lead. We have the Swedish Midwifery Association now having a fantastic group of midwives coming together to see how we can position the role of the midwives more strongly on the global agenda. So you have researchers, you have people working with midwifery training, et cetera, global policies. So if there's an interest to continue this, get together and get a good group of people and not just the usual suspects. Get them as well, because they've got a lot of things to offer. But see, where can we make a difference? Where can we make a difference? Sweden is a reasonably small country, but not that small. And by building on this, can we, and in that case, you need to identify what is it that you like to pursue? Where, how, and by who? But the whole sort of here, getting different kinds of actors together, I think we could make quite a big difference. So what we have up and running right now is one group working on midwifery, another group working on global health security and emergency. We met the day before yesterday, talking about the links in between humanitarian work and the international health regulations and see how Sweden can pursue that and push that. We have another group meeting next week, and the Swedish Cancer Foundation convening that around risk factors and NCDs. And then the group of midwives. Then I'm sure I'm forgetting someone. There is a growing interest also to do some more work around mental health, as somebody was saying. So the next meeting that we have for all interested people in global health will be not, as I announced before the summer, on the 19th of September. It will be on the 30th of September. And the theme that time will be mental health, and we will have an invited guest coming to speak to us about mental health. So, I mean, if there's an interest, continue. If you like to have a dialogue, how we can do that, what opportunities we have, where to continue and pursue this agenda, I'm very happy to support, and there are other colleagues that can do that as well. So, but a big thank you for this. I will bring this report, and I will definitely use this report in my global work. It was extremely useful, so a big thank you.
And just before Anders leaves, when you take this report, this is just a starting point. If you read it at night, you wake up and this is a mistake, this can be better, this is something I want to do, contact us. We will continue the process, as Anders discussed, around child health in this process. Contact us, take part, and deliver on it. Thanks.
Yes.
Tack själva. Vad kul.
Snabbt, liksom vi inte diskuterar.
Ja. Det är alldeles riktigt.
Vad är det mer jag tänkte på?
Det finns med, men det kan stärkas. Nutrition finns med, men det finns återigen, det har varit väldigt, det har varit jättemycket skär.